Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Masters of Code, our video series wherein we talk to technologists about technology and everything else around it. I'm your host Alok Soni, and today we have Sidu Ponnappa with us. Sidu was until recently Senior VP at Gojek, and before that MD of Gojek India. Sidu, really glad to have you to be discussing something which we have discussed in the past as well. And I know that you're probably one of the best people to discuss this, which is building teams versus building technology.
Thanks, Alok. Really a pleasure as always. Thank you for having me here.
Sure. Just to set the context here, we're going to cover what does it take to build a high-performing team versus what does it take to build robust and resilient systems and technologies and solutions, and how are they different in different scenarios. I'll right away start with a very basic thing, which is about building efficient systems. So you have done it multiple times over and over again and again. What do you think does it take to build highly efficient systems? Apart from the team side, of course, you need a very strong team, high performing, but what does it take to when it comes to building these efficient systems and technologies?
I think a lot of it boils down to, look, first, let me caveat that, I'm a lot of what I'm saying is based on what I've learned from my colleagues, because I went more on the post-technical side of things. So I'm closer to the people side than that. I mean, I still code, but on any team I'm on, I'm the worst programmer there, right? So having caveated that, like this part of it, whatever I say, stuff that I've learned from my friends and colleagues. And I think that it becomes very important to sort of dig into each of these labels. Because I think prima facie, from a sort of an executive or a managerial perspective, you'll say, of course, I want efficient systems. The challenge is, what does efficient mean? Are we talking about the cost of our infrastructure? Are we saying that we want our AWS or GCP bills to be at a certain place? Are we saying that we want the systems to be maximally utilized? Are we saying it's CPU memory efficiency? Are we saying that we want uptime? And the challenge is that it's very easy to sort of set efficiency as a goal, because a lot of these sub-objectives are actually in conflict. Because if you try to optimize one, you're going to de-optimize the other. And it's almost certain that you can't optimize all of them simultaneously. So I think when we're talking about an efficient system, it first becomes very important to say efficient along which axes, and therefore inefficient along which other axes. What are we willing to live with, right? I think the most common thing would be, at an early stage, you definitely care a lot about the cost. So I think cost efficiency of infrastructure is very obviously a consideration. It's a weird inflection in my mind, right? There's like a mid-scale where you've raised a lot of money and suddenly no one is stressing about the bills anymore. And then suddenly you reach scale, and then suddenly you have so much infrastructure that, your CFO is sitting in your technical meetings saying, boss, reduce the bill, right? So I think it becomes very important early on, if you're looking at cost efficiency, to have a sort of you can do it manually, frankly, especially in the beginning, because you don't have that many machines. But I think by the time you scale to a certain volume, you need to have a system in place to track and manage, who's allowed to spin up boxes, which boxes, what is the projected cost, because these are very basic things to do early. But if you bolt them on later, you may end up not being able to do it, or taking years, because the moment you have thousands of boxes, it's a non-trivial project. So, my simple advice there is just day zero, have a manual process to track every box and to have simple rules around what boxes can be spun up at what types of boxes, what is the cost, and to have a simple financial projection saying, listen, this is how much it's going to cost us. And as you scale up, you may have to bring in an off-the-shelf product, or develop a small tool internally, whatever is more appropriate to automate that, because a simple Google Sheet may no longer suffice. But the idea is to have process around it as early as possible, right? So that's the cost optimization part. I don't really know if CPU utilization, memory utilization can be easily attacked. Not that it doesn't matter, but that is so tightly coupled with other things like the architecture and the rate of evolution. Like, for example, at Gojek, we had made a decision to use JRuby and Rails very early on. And if I remember right, we had scaled to 1.5 million trips a day on top of a fairly vanilla JRuby Rails Postgres stack. And it used to be really hilarious because at that time, before that also we had this mindset that, oh, you need these complex architectures to support scale. And we realized that was good old Rails and JRuby and Postgres is scaling fine. I mean, yeah, obviously there were some bits and pieces that we needed to work around, introduce some queues and all that. But the bigger pieces of it were scaling just fine. The price we paid was memory, right? Because we're running on the JVM, so there's a huge amount of memory consumption. And I remember there was a point where there was a key subsystem that got rewritten into Golang. Maybe I think when we were at 2 million or 2 million plus, and that subsystem went from 40 boxes to 2 boxes, right? Now, it's very difficult to say when is the right time to make that trade-off. Because if we had gone ahead and tried to do it efficiently day zero, we would have lost an insane amount of productivity because Rails is just productive. Yeah? There's nothing that compares to it in terms of productivity for that type of use case. So I think that's a difficult one to sort of tackle in isolation, right? And I think the last part of efficiency, which is worth talking about without like a specific business context, is developer efficiency, right? Like making sure that you're investing in the right tool chains and practices so that developer productivity is there. And I think this is the one which falls into that category of problems that everybody in theory cares about, but in practice, no one actually cares about, right? Like there is nobody who's going to say that, hey, we don't care about the productivity of our developers. Or rather, they will say, yes, of course we care about the dev. But what are we practically doing about it day to day? Can we talk about what is your approach to tool chains? Which editors? Why? What standardization? Which libraries? How are they standardized? How do you allow experimentation around frameworks without having, a massive, an unsupportable stack? Because the other extreme of this is like if everyone is picking whatever languages and tools suit them, then you have to the production support around them becomes non-trivial. So what is your methodology around this? How do you measure productivity? And you'll find that there's very little or no structure around this. So I would say, like, without getting into a specific example, like these would be the buckets that I can talk about.
Sure. I wanted to expand on the last part now because that's also my second question with respect to building high performing teams, right? There are so many books around it. No rules. I can think of immediately wherein people talk about how to go about it in terms of culture wise also. But for developers, when we talk about it, you did mention about that, small things like what kind of tools are using, how you have to pay attention towards each and every aspect of their productivity. And then of course, right now, happiness quotient is also something which is required. And given the crazy demand of engineers and developers today, it has become even more so important. It was always important, but to make sure that you are taking in the right set of people and you are inducting them to what you have built, right? And you're able to provide them the right kind of environment. So how do you go about building and scaling that high performing team, and how does it vary across stages if it does?
I think you're going to get a sort of polarizing answer from me on this, right? I think the best performers are always people who like their jobs. I think the simplest and least addressed aspect of building high performing teams is only hiring people who like that type of work, whatever that work may be. I think this is something which people obviously implicitly understand. But the truth is that, there are so few people in the industry who like their own work, or even worse, hate their jobs. That that thought process doesn't flow into your interviewing and organization design methodology. A simple test for this is, hey, you've got an interview loop for candidates. Forget even the sourcing loop, right? Interview loop. Can you point to the specific aspects of the interview loop which are filtering or selecting for candidates who genuinely enjoy that type of work, whether it is design or product management or engineering or whatever it may be, right? And you will not get an answer to that question, right? If you go out onto the floor and of most setups and you have a chat with people, you will find an inordinate number of examples of organizations and people who are there because you know what, this business now pays really well. Now, the reality is that, you know, ours is a business where standardization is not a solution. Now, I'll tell you why I'm talking about this. If you look at how manufacturing solved the quality problem, we solve the quality problem through standardization, right? So you bucket all your R&D upfront with some seriously hardcore, creative, clever people who will design the headlight. And let's pick cars as an example for manufacturing. They'll design the headlight, they'll have the aerodynamic tunnel, they figure out this, they'll say, okay, who's the people who are going to use this? Is this a family car? Is it a sports car? What sort of tire should it have? How should the windows be? How do we design the doors? And there is a very sort of tight feedback loop, creative mechanism that goes into R&D to design a vehicle. And then the scale is achieved by an entirely different type of system, which is your assembly line. And the assembly line scales because everything is standardized. It's the same door, it's the same window, it's the same. So manufacturing leverage comes from extreme standardization. Unfortunately, in tech, in product, our leverage actually comes from the fact that we are non-standard. Every component, every subsystem, even if you take industries, right? Like we'll say, oh, one transport company's marketplace team, another transport company's marketplace team. The reality is the only thing that will be in common will be the broad problem statement and the label, right? If you get into the details of how a marketplace team and a marketplace platform for a transport business from one major O2O company to another major O2O company works, it's completely different, right? And that's turtles all the way down. You get down to subcomponent, get down to, one piece of code that is being implemented to solve a particular problem. And you will find that that solution is not standard. Now, this is where our leverage comes from. The fact that we have these non-standard solutions is where we are able to create the kind of force multiplication that you see. There's a reason why software is eating the world, right? But this comes with two challenges and two severe challenges. The first is that it remains a craft, right? It means that it is now down to the individual commitment of each worker to enhancing their craft. We cannot standardize this by saying, listen, boss, I don't care whether you have a passion for this or not. There's a process, there's an assembly line. You show up, you hit this hammer here, you hit that nail there. Here's your process, just do these things. And the end result is the same. That's not how this works. So the first challenge that we have is it boils down to the commitment of the individual to their particular craft. The second part of the problem that this creates is measurement becomes challenging. Now, I'm saying this somewhat speculatively, but I know it's true for any professionally run industrial firm. Now, let's say that someone makes 10 cars a month, just picking a number. If you go to the person who's running that factory and say, listen, I need to scale this to 30 cars a month, they can come back to you with a fairly structured quantitative set of inputs saying, we need to increase these assembly lines from N to N plus. We need this many more staff to staff these assembly lines in this way. We need to go up to our supply chain, our vendors, and say that these incoming components, these raw materials need to be increased from X to X plus. Now, just try this conversation with anyone running a startup or a tech thing. Say, listen, we want to increase output to X. What do we do? Your first problem is we don't even know what X is. We know our business metrics, right? We know how many orders, how many bookings, conversion rate, churn, CAC, we know those things. But the system that is taking capital talent as input and then shipping out marketing campaigns, software, operational processes, customer research, that system is completely a black box. So if I say we don't even know what X is, let alone saying, hey, now I want to make 2X of X. Therefore, what do I need in the input, right? Even worse, because we don't know what X is, we don't have a correlation between X and the business metrics. So we don't even know that, listen, do I hire 50% more people, 100% more people? What processes do I change? Which departments do I need? Do I need more designers? Do I need more engineers? So you will notice this, and this is like a fun metric that I like to pick because it upsets so many people, right? It's just like, what is the ratio of product managers to engineers in your organization? Because the reason why picking a ratio of anything to engineers is interesting is because engineers are the ultimate bottleneck. If you look at any software-driven company, the last mile where the rubber meets the road is engineers writing code, right? So you can have designers doing their work, but if the engineers don't productionize the code, the designs never go to the customer, right? You can have product managers writing requirements, doing whatever. If the engineers don't write the code, those never reach the customer. So the engineering team is the ultimate bottleneck. Now, this automatically means that there is a sane ratio, right? We can't objectively say what that ratio is, but for each business, for each problem, whatever it is, there is a sane ratio, right? And it's very, very self-evident that that ratio is not 1:1. Right? It cannot be, right? Because it makes no sense, right? You will need, because it takes time to write code. There are 100 problems. You know how complicated and risky writing code is. So obviously, you'd be shocked at how many, startups in the industry actually have a 1:1 ratio, or so close as makes no difference. So now, when you are building a high-performing team, what becomes very important is to attack these problems. The first is, because it is down to the craft of the individual, you do not want to hire a product manager or a designer or an engineer or a data scientist who is not deeply into their craft. If they don't get a kick from practicing their craft, they have no incentive to improve their craft, right? That automatically means their incentives are primarily indexing on things like compensation, power, status, which is fair. There's nothing wrong with that. But you take away passion for the craft from that, and suddenly you're creating a death spiral, right? You will see this manifest in companies historically, where the people who do the work are in the least desired role, and growth is getting further away from the work, right? What is your career aspiration? Yeah, I wanted, I did engineering because I wanted a job. Fair, nothing wrong with that. Then I joined company X as a team lead, as a developer. My career objective is to become a team lead because a team lead doesn't write code. And then to become a project manager, because that takes me even further away from the code, because I'm terrified of writing code and I hate writing code. Does this sound familiar? I mean, I have enough peers who went through this process because, 20 years ago, what were the job options, right? Now, you will see the opposite dynamic in a company which indexes on craft, which is you will see everyone who's moving into leadership roles having a crisis, full blown, the professional equivalent of a midlife crisis, right? Which is, yeah, I barely get to write code anymore. I'm no longer really, I'm just sitting in meetings and convincing people of stuff. Yeah, I haven't even shipped a design. I saw a tweet the other day, which sort of evoked this. I designed, what was it? It was I designed the PowerPoint deck for a pitch meeting just to feel something again, right? From a design leader, right? So, I understand that there is a certain sort of a complaint that's being voiced there, but you have to understand that that complaint is a signal of the right approach, right? Where people who are moving away from the craft are deeply concerned about their distance from it, not the other way around, where people moving away from the craft consider it a sign of growth and progress, right? So that's the first. You have to index on a commitment to the craft, a desire to improve the craft, and frankly, a sense of self-identity and self-worth that is a function of the level of capability in the craft, right? The second part of it is you need to have processes and systems which allow you to deal with the fact that your execution is a series of non-standard components being built, right? And these components often are input into other components. So you can model your entire product execution as a series of artifacts, right? Someone goes out, does research, there's a research artifact that's created. Someone is writing a PRD, the research artifact is an input into that. Wireframes get created, those are other artifacts, right? So it's a chain of artifacts which eventually comes out. Code is another artifact. Some of those artifacts are even expressed because there is code wrapped around them, right? So for example, designs reach the customer because they are expressed by wrapping code around them and shipping them as part of the app, right? But the ability to model the flow of artifacts through your system and your ability to quality control each artifact and to identify where artifacts are failing to get created or are piling up, which is your classic inventory management, right? That is integral to your ability to build a strong team, because you can have amazing people who are really passionate about the craft and the whole system clogged and nothing's moving, right? And then those people get frustrated and they leave. So I think these two things have to go hand in hand. And the second part is really, I mean, the first part is easy if you're already a maker, right? If you're someone who hates your job, you have no chance in hell of solving problem one. That, I mean, that has to come from within, right? You have to have loved your job at some point to be able to hire and, identify people who love it. Problem two is especially challenging because the whole problem is so recent, right? We've not had growth stage tech companies until the late 90s. The entire space is less than 20 years old. There is literally no industry knowledge. This is not like, manufacturing of cars, which has gone through like a global scale structured innovation process. Even there, to be frank, most of what is done today was, innovated by Toyota in the sort of like 60s and 70s, and then became the standard in the late 90s, 2000s. So we are yet to have those processes and systems even be developed. Frankly, most managers, including me in tech, are running around clueless because we have no numbers, we have no metrics, we have no way. The whole thing is very fuzzy and amorphous. It's all great when it's small, because when it's small, you get like a bunch of really passionate craftspeople and they will meld together. They will. You don't need to do anything. But you scale this up to multiple groups, each unicorn scale. Now you have, transport, food, payments. Yeah, now we have like multiple unicorn businesses. Each of these have to integrate with each other at certain points. Suddenly you'll find that there are streams of work which get blocked for 2 years, right? And the problem is that the solution to this is not well understood. And I don't mean not well understood by us, not well understood at an industrial level, just because we have so little going on in the way of examples, right? My working thesis is that there is a lot to be learned from the hardware side, because they deal with all of these problems, yet they ship. So if you look at Apple, for example, you will get a new phone, every 6 months, right? Across multiple product lines. Basically, they have a nearly like, crystal clear 1 year product cycle. Now, trying to get, like, by and large, I have never been able to achieve that, right? And if you look at the way they do it, their discipline levels are through the roof. So my sense is that we have a lot to learn by looking at companies like Apple, basically companies which have a hardware software background that do ship like clockwork.
Okay. Okay, that's very, very elaborate. But I sense a bit of idealism also in that, what you just mentioned. And I think you, in let's say last 7 to 10 years of your own journey, would have seen that to what extent can you compromise with, I mean, you want people who really are good at their craft, right? And who really want to do. And otherwise, you're saying these are the problem solvers who will generally solve. Otherwise, you'll have to push, and there's only so much you can do. And I know that in early stage, it might be very important, because without it, you're not solving. So there's no product and there's nothing happening. But once you
Yeah.
achieve a certain growth, then you start being okay with the compromise of that, what I want, probably my core team or my, uh, you know, 30% of the people like this, and 50% I'm fine. I'm looking only for these qualities and rest is fine. Right. So I want to talk about that, what do you think are those skills which I can slightly generalize, and wherein I'm relaxing, I'm giving some sort of relaxation in this rules key, even if this person is not really passionate about it, and it's difficult. I mean, you can put I understand because Gojek has experimented a lot, and if I'm not wrong, the ratio was also crazy in terms of the number of people who used to apply versus people who used to get through. And there was one discussion around it once. Ki, does it send wrong signal to the people out there? I mean, good people will not even apply. Hey, why do I have to go through so much, right? And then is there some sort of negativity being spread? So, but coming back to my question, which is like once you start getting relaxed, giving those relaxations here and there, what are those skills which you would like to define? Ki, if I want to build a very solid team, these are the skill sets which I am looking at, or people who are building, very resilient system. These are the skill sets. I understand. Look, ultimately, you want to judge how passionate and how good they are with respect to their craft. But if
Yeah.
I have to kind of quantify and put those skills, and the reason I'm saying this is because at scale it won't be possible for people who are excellent in terms of judging this, or for example at Gojek it would, when you were head of talent acquisition,
Yeah.
it wasn't
Yeah.
possible for you to be, actually I don't know, you might be actually sitting in all the interviews, but still it's little
No, no.
impractical.
Look, at the end of the day, the question is, what is the price you're willing to pay? Right? See, compromise is the core of life. Question is, what price do you pay for the compromise? Right? Like I have seen cases which I can't name, which are now post unicorn stage and no one dares touch the product. There's an executive order saying no one will touch the product because we don't know anymore. We have no control over uptime, nothing. Any changes made could take the system down. But post unicorn scale, right? All the people who had the context have left. We didn't put in place processes and systems to capture that context in such a way that new people coming on board can pick it up. Right? So what I'm trying to illustrate is there are severe failure modes which come with the wrong kind of compromises. Now, even if you take Google, for example, I think Google is legendary for having a high bar. So Google now, everyone agrees that hiring volumes have gone up. We know for a fact that they're not only hiring PhDs and master's degree holders, right? In the 2000s, if you didn't have a master's degree minimum, like master's degree was the minimum to even show up for an interview. So it's very obvious that as companies scale up, you have to dial down the bar very sort of thoughtfully in different areas to bring in talent to do certain types of work or solve certain types of problems, right? I don't think there's a easily generalizable answer to how to do it. Because the problem again with tech is that you have this negative black swan problem, which is that when failure occurs, it will occur abruptly and in extreme ways, right? Where, 1 year ago you were shipping and now suddenly your code base is untouchable, for example. And the whole game as a manager or an executive in this system is to sort of study it and try to understand what could bring up a negative black swan and to try to hedge against it. But that's very situational, right? The opposite side of this narrative is that, I think a lot of management teams make certain compromises without asking because they're graduating in the batch. Like this is how I like to put it, right? They're like, listen, I graduated, I've become a unicorn. But no one is asking, could I have been a decapon? Like, and the problem is that it's opaque. Now you can't say whether if you had done X, Y, and Z better, you would have graduated at the top of the class. All we know is that we graduate. But my intuition based on a lot of the stories I hear is a lot of companies end up graduating in the bottom half of the class when they could have graduated at the top half. And in this game, bottom to top is 10x difference. But because we graduated, it's fine. Now, what this boils down to is, listen, I can't tell you how to compromise, right? You're going to live and die by the consequences of that compromise. What I will say is that you should, especially when it comes to talent and quality of execution, whether I'm talking about code quality or people quality, you want to dilute that fighting bitterly every step of the way. Like Google has opened the taps over 20 years, right? And their hiring bar today is still higher than 99% of the market, right? I mean, this is after 20 years of dilution. and they're still hiring better than 99% of the market. And the reason for this is, there's a price to pay on the other side. I mean, the question really is, and I think this is something which I was talking about the other day on Twitter as well, is that you have to look at your workforce and sort of split them into strongly correlated with hours versus not strongly correlated with hours, right? So for example, if you have an operations team, a call center team, for example, the number of calls a call center team can take is more or less strongly correlated with the numbers of hours they work, right? But the number of additional orders generated is not strongly correlated with the number of hours the product manager or the designer or the engineer put, right? So now if you've got this, a majority of your leverage coming from the second bucket, you really, really have to ask yourself the question, what is the cost of a drop in quality? Because the cost of drop in quality for this pool is not linear, it's supralinear. So there I would advocate for, of course you have to dilute as you scale, but I would fight that dilution tooth and nail, compromise grudgingly every step of the way, having a really, really good reason for every single small compromise. Because otherwise it's very easy to go straight from like, yeah, we're booming 10% week on week, we are a unicorn, to shit. Now no one can touch the code base in a matter of like 24 months.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, it's interesting what you mentioned about Google, and I think one thing which Google has been able to do, and is right now setting benchmark for so many other startups also who are going global or having distributed teams, still maintaining that uniformity, right? That the bar is high across. So look, Gojek also has teams across at least three places I know, right? Singapore, India, and in Indonesia.
Indonesia, yeah.
While building systems and teams both, to what extent do you think cultural nuances matter, or you have to take care of those?
Enormous. Just
Okay.
enormous. I mean, I thought, look, I've been in distributed teams from the moment I started working. And I thought, I had an appreciation of it. But no, it's insanely important. It's like, I used to sort of look at these management books that talked about cultural problems in MNCs. I used to look at them with disdain. I'm like, yeah, please, yeah, this is some MBA faff again, right? You cut an MBA and they'll come up with some random problem which no one can quantify, no one can justify. I used to look at it with contempt. I'm like, yeah, you have the right processes, it'll sort itself out. But no, it turned out that I was missing a very crucial definition for culture, which I came across in a book fairly recently, like 3-4 years ago, well into Gojek, which kind of like shook me and completely shifted my thinking, which said that, listen, process is how people make decisions for things where there is a known output, predictable, right? It's like, I want to achieve X, so follow step A, B, C, D, E with inputs 1, 2, 3, and you have a 90% probability of getting output X. That's a process, right? Culture is how people make decisions wherever there isn't a process. Now, if you think about an organization, processes are 10% of the game. Processes fundamentally don't scale. I mean, they're the least shitty option we have. We don't have a better alternative than a process. But you can't put a process for everything. That's crazy, right? Like, just does not, its processes are fundamentally non-scalable. So suddenly I realized that, oh my God, like the remaining 90% of decision making that's happening outside of processes, which fundamentally are the place where we are gaining our success from, are obviously going to be dramatically shaped by the underlying culture of the country you come from, the community you come from, Sapir-Whorf, right? The languages you speak, the languages you don't speak. And I was blindsided by the extent to which this matters. It's really, really, really important. Like Indonesian, Singaporean, Indian culture, there are very fundamental differences between them at a nuanced level, which cannot be quantified. And if you're not sensitive to, you could just cause complete, utter disasters. And that's just those. Like, I think the more multicultural your organization is, the more important it is that you spend time studying it. And the worse it is because there's no playbook.
I was talking to one of the person who has been in the space of employer branding and employer retaining, talent acquisition side, both the sides, and we're having this conversation around the understanding the cultural nuances side, right?
Right.
Uh, and since you mentioned, I just want to know, in your experience, do you think it is something which has to be said by the founder very early on, and or the founding team, and it has to percolate down there, or is it something which you have to hire a very smart HR or your head of talent acquisition, and then that person has to dictate it across the teams, right? That you have to ensure that this has to be done, or this is something which has to be taken care of at a later stage with the individual team heads. How do you think is the right way to go about it?
It,
Uh,
I don't think there's a right way. Honestly, I think it's all of the above.
it's all.
It's all, and I don't think we can meaningfully, like, I have never seen this done right, ever. I have only seen different levels of failure. It's like egregious failure versus acceptable failure. I have never seen success. And I mean, I'm talking about my own execution as well.
But what were some of those mistakes which you think could have been avoided and which are very common when you are dealing with hiring from different regions or when you certainly don't take care of cultural nuances?
I think it's very, very, your biggest problem is going to be language.
Okay.
You have this bitter decision to take where you are damned if you do, damned if you don't. Either you say that we will standardize language, or you say I won't standardize language. If you standardize language, you're automatically rejecting all the people who are not fluent in that language, right? If you don't standardize language, suddenly you have communication gaps left, right, and center, and Sapir-Whorf will rear its head all over the organization. Words mean different things. You don't even grasp how bad this is until you have people from fundamentally different languages, whose first language, whose native tongue is different, having to communicate and collaborate on abstract things rather than operational things, right? Because you want to have a conversation about high value customers. It will turn out that the way people who speak one language and one culture have interpreted high value customer is completely different from someone in a different language. Because the problem is, high value customer is a consensus. There's no actually such a thing as a high value customer, right? A high value customer is whatever all of us agree a high value customer is. That agreement becomes fragmented. Then achieving consensus becomes really slow. Suddenly you're in a company that's moving like at a glacial pace. As it is, it's tough to get people to agree on things at scale. Now, if there are language barriers between them, oh God, it's crazy.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. With respect to teams, Sidhu, do you have, I mean, in bits and pieces, we have discussed about different
Yeah,
frameworks which you have
yeah,
been following or which you have picked.
yeah.
But is there a decision-making framework which you follow when it comes to resolving the issues of the teams or individuals when we're talking about?
Look, I have found that there are broadly two classes of problems, very, very broadly, right? One class of problem is behavioral. The person is just, somebody on the team is misbehaving. And misbehaving could be anything from uh, not, not putting in effort, all the way out to really bad things like sexual assault, right? There's an entire spectrum of behavioral problems. And these are pretty straightforward, right? As in, when I say straightforward, I mean that most companies have systems and processes in place to address them, for better or for worse, right? You could have somebody who says, oh, now we're going to clock in 9 to 5. I don't care. Or you could have, like a team leader level thing where the team leader says, listen, no, this is not okay. Let's figure out why you're having difficulty, whatever, right? But people become aware of these problems. I think the more subtle and important one is that a lot of problems stem because we don't have a methodology for collaboration. People do Scrum. I'm like, why did you pick Scrum? Is Scrum good or bad? Are they better or worse alternatives? No idea. You can pick any of the processes in most companies around execution of product, and nobody can tell you why it's there. Nobody can tell. It's all organically evolved. The interface points from one process to another process. Okay, why do we have PRDs at all? How do we convert PRDs into code? This is a very common one, right? Yeah, I write the PRD, I go give it to an EM. And then I don't know, not my problem. So I think that this actually ties back to our previous conversation, right? That I hate the label factory because it has the wrong connotations for this kind of problem, but I'm still using it, having caveated that the factory is a black box. We don't know how things are moving within it. We don't know where the bottlenecks are. We don't know where things fail. If we have to scale it up, we don't know what to scale up on the input to scale the output. And this creates enormous friction between people and teams. It's just like, yeah, those guys, they don't care. We have this critical deliverable. These drivers are, their orders are not going through and they just don't care.
But look, what you are saying, I'm somewhere it's I think directly or indirectly saying that you want people to be thinking from first principles, like not just adapt or adopt things how they are here and there.
Yes,
But doesn't it slow down things a lot?
it does until and unless you reify those first principles into a process. Look, my first 5 years of work as a dev, and I realized this is not standard only when I got out. I didn't have to think about my system. It didn't matter which project, which technology stack. Come in the morning, there's a stand up, there's a story wall after that, walk up to the story wall after stand up. Stand up, we have synchronized what everyone was working on. Walk up to the story wall. Am I still continuing on my card from yesterday? Okay, I'm cool. I just see who picks what up. Is my card done? Okay, I'm going to hand the card off to the next stage, pick up a new card from the top of the list. Instead, if you go to a typical startup and you see all of this is in a complex, messy, non-standard prioritization process, workflow management, project management, here everything was just standard. I didn't even think. When I came out, I was shocked at the chaos. So absolutely, I'm saying think from first principles, but you have to reify those first principles into a process. You don't want people to have to think about this stuff over and over and over again. Why isn't there standardized contracts? Like if you go back and look at, that it's been bubbling around on Twitter again recently, Bezos's 2002 API mandate, right? Steve Yege had this really nice rant about it, which he had written like 10 years ago. Why did Bezos, taking a company at that scale and then restructuring it, it is worse than a reorg, right? As a leader, why would he take the hit of essentially stalling execution for 2 years? Because that would have been the consequence, in order to restructure all the teams into standard contracts and interfaces. Because it matters. Because you don't want people to have to think about how one team integrates with another team. We don't want people to have to think about how work is passed from two collaborating teams which are across product groups. If you don't think about these problems, first principles, and design a process, this is not about creating a ossified process that cannot change. Processes must change. This is an argument for saying, boss, there is no process. Look, all of this is code that runs on people. Show me your code. If you don't have code, you're just doing arbitrary things on a daily basis and hoping it all works out. What is a process? There's a process. We call it a process in a computer also, right? What is the difference here? There are some processes that run on people. There are some processes that run on computers. But both those processes have to have code in order for the process to be viable, right? Now, most of the processes that run on people don't have code equivalents. Now, obviously, that's going to result in chaos. And that chaos is a massive productivity sapper, massive morale sapper, has really, really bad impact on top line and bottom line. And worst of all, it manifests as interpersonal problems.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Get it. Okay. In the interest of time, this will be the last question. And it ties up to one of the point wherein you mentioned that one of the organization which you didn't name, wherein as the team is moving out, there's a mandate that do not touch the code, do not touch. Now, with respect to it's still, and that was a unicorn, I think you said. What about smaller organization also? But it's very common, given the crazy demand of engineers. What I said, right? What you are building, and in here, of course, the importance of processes goes up significantly. But I sometimes practically it might not be possible, right? To put everything in perspective of this key, what if the team which is building is not there when you have to scale, when you have to do? And I think in last 2-3 years, it has intensified further. People are spending less time and less exclusive time also now. I think with the whole emergence of Web3, its time is divided also and accordingly compensated for. And but otherwise, in general, people are spending relatively lesser time in organization and there's fast movement of talent from one place to the other. And in these cases, and at the same time, the importance of building the systems and the teams which are known by certain values and culture, and systems which are even more robust has also gone up. So how do you kind of balance this out as somebody who is leading, who is building the entire thing?
Look, I always go back to open source. None of these problems are new. Open source has been solving them for 40 years. The whole internet is built on top of open source. The internet is open source. There's no, I mean, it's like there's nothing to innovate here, right? Just go to an open source team. People come, people go. Some people may fix one issue and disappear. I mean, you want to talk about fluidity of talent, look at an open source project. There's nothing to innovate here. The problem with this is that the open source model takes enormous managerial discipline. And it demands a certain discipline from the participants. So now when we talk about Web3, by definition, all of these people are contributing to open source. So they have that discipline. But if you don't have managerial discipline and you don't have participant discipline, the system doesn't work. And my read on the startup thing is participant discipline will be there. Managerial discipline is lacking. Like the problem is not getting engineers to follow processes. The problem is getting managers to follow processes. It is much easier to get an engineer to follow a process than it is to get a manager to follow a process.
And do you think that it's impacting the robustness of the systems or the products or the solutions which are being built
Absolutely,
today?
without a doubt. Without a doubt. Of course it will. It's impossible that it does not. Right? See, the thing with open source that is not true for startups is open source can take its time. There is no existential threat. If there is a competitor, it's not existential. Both can coexist. If one kills the other, it will kill the other over a period of years just by being the superior product, right? And the people in the old product can leave the old product without a commercial or economic harm coming to them. They can just say, you know what, fair, that alternative product, whatever, Angular and React, Angular just slowly, naturally died out, right? So there's no economic consequence. The problem with startups is first, you have time pressure. So you can't do this at an organic pace. Open source basically is like volunteers come, volunteers go, we'll speed up, we'll slow down, no issues. Not true for startups. Second, competition is existential. The competition is actively seeking to kill you in every way possible, not just by building a superior product, right? So now into this mix, if you add this chaos, if you can't basically get your team to engage with you, then you are dramatically reducing the probability of success. There's no two ways about it.
I think that summarizes a lot of things, and that should be it from my side. Thanks again, Sidu, for taking out time for this.
Not at all. Thanks so much, Alok. Really appreciate it.
I think each and every question was probably a separate discussion on its own, but really happy that, to have this discussion, and glad to have you. Thanks again for your time. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Alok.